Hello everyone, I am back, and this time I am here with a theory, a Gravity Falls theory. Something that I noticed in the Gravity Falls Lost Legends book contradicted just a little bit with something that was in journal number 3. There is a possibility that it's not a contradiction, but it is interesting what I had found. So what I'm looking at here is the idea of two of the same people getting in contact with each other from different dimensions, and journal number 3 states that would end up destroying the entire dimension itself. In journal number 3, Stanford finds another dimension that's similar to his Earth dimension, and the only difference is that Stanley took journal number 1 and took it to the ends of the Earth like he told him to. So that's the only difference. So Stanford wanted to go and meet his dimensional counterpart. However, the FIDDLEFORD of that particular dimension ends up telling him, actually basically kidnapping him and putting him in a closet, telling him that he cannot see his other dimensional counterpart because it could destroy the entire dimension. Let me go ahead and read an excerpt out of journal number 3, and that will show this particular incident. A few years back, he had been leading a portal expedition to a particularly dangerous dimension when one of the security officers ran into his parallel self. As soon as they touched hands, the entire dimension began to warp and fizz with static. FIDDLEFORD and the rest of his team escaped back to their own dimension, but the officer was never heard from again. In fact, that whole dimension has ceased to exist. So what this is saying here is that because the two dimensional counterparts, came in contact with each other, and it caused a whole disruption in the space-time continuum or whatever nonsense, and the entire dimension exploded. Now, here is the thing in Gravity Falls Lost Legends that contradicts that. In the comic story, Don't Dimension It, Mabel finds herself lost in the multiverse, and she ends up in a dimension that's completely full of lost Mabels. However, they're able to talk and interact with each other just fine, and it doesn't harm the stability of that dimension at all. So I find it plausible that FIDDLEFORD may have lied to Stanford about the dangers of coming in contact with his other dimensional counterpart in order to kind of keep him away from other Stanfords for what I would think would be kind of obvious reasons, taking into account Stanford's personality, and he's kind of full of himself. He's got a pretty big ego, so I don't think him meeting himself, who is, in a sense more successful than him, I don't think that would have been a good mix. We also have no idea, how Stanford's success would have actually influenced or affected him as a character, and it might have made him a bigger jerk than what we kind of already knew him to be. And so I don't think Stanford meeting his other dimensional counterpart in that way would have been a very pleasant encounter for anybody, and FIDDLEFORD may have been trying to prevent that. So I think it's plausible to think maybe that's a reason why he may have lied about the coming in contact with your other dimensional counterpart. However, he also may have not lied. It could be true, and there are just different ramifications that may have been in effect as to why that particular moment caused the entire dimension to collapse, and the reason why the Mabel dimension does not collapse. The reason as to why possibly the Mabel dimension does not collapse, where all the lost Mabels are, is because that is not their home dimension. That is a dimension that is specifically designed to hold lost Mabels. So therefore, it's a dimension where they can all exist at once and not cause any sort of disruptions to the dimension or its stability. So if Mabel, say, went to a dimension and she met a Mabel that was originally from that particular dimension, and she came in contact with that Mabel, then there probably would be the same effect as the security guard that went to the other dimension. They came in contact and the entire dimension fell apart. But because the dimension that Mabel went to was specifically for lost Mabels and not necessarily the primary dimension of each one of the Mabels, then maybe that's why it didn't fall apart. Maybe I'm just looking a little bit too much into this, but you know what? This is interesting to me, so stop making fun of me. This is fun. Shut up. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to tell you to shut up. If you're still listening, I appreciate you. But that's pretty much my thoughts on that. So it's either FIDDLEFORD lied in order to keep Ford from meeting himself and becoming a more giant ego than you could probably imagine, or the reason why is because the Mabel dimension isn't non-existent is because that dimension is specifically for lost Mabels, and it's not like Mabel went to a particular dimension and came in contact with the Mabel that belonged to that dimension. And just a little bit more thoughts on this. In Gravity Falls Lost Legends, it says that when people get lost in the multiverse, they kind of, get drawn to one another, and that's where all the Mabels end up, is in that particular dimension. Did Ford ever end up in a dimension with a whole bunch of Fords? If that's the case, maybe that's why he thought it would be fine for him just, go and say hi to this particular Ford in this particular dimension. But I guess we'll never know unless Alex decides to tell us or we get some further information. But it's not really relevant or important to the story. It's just interesting to think about and theorize. But that is all I have for this video. Thank you for watching. Let me know your thoughts about this in the comment section below, and that'll be it. Bye!